Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. Tyrion 2094 AC. Waking up earlier than usual, Tyrion had come face to face with what was starting to rival Ghost for the role of Tormentor-in-Chief. How the Black Cat had managed to make it into his locked room would, if he thought about it, give him nightmares, but waking to the cat standing on his table and looking at him was probably enough to do that already. When the cat was with his cousin, it was almost pleasant until you came close to it. When it was on its own, it never was. And as he looked at it, he silently prayed he'd leave his room without a scratch. Almost as soon as he moved, the hissing began. He could feel its eyes on him when he dressed. He moved quickly and went to leave the room, only for the cat to run across his feet, almost causing him to scream. He would swear later if anyone asked that the cat, as it ran up the hall, turned back and smirked at him. Damn Jon Snow, he thought as he left his room. When he arrived at the hall, he found he was the only member of his family to be there. He quickly took his meal and sat down, looking forward to the burned bacon. Usually he'd only break his fast here if there were family doing likewise. If not, he'd take his meal in his solar. But this morning, after his encounter with the Black Cat, he felt far more comfortable in public. He ate at a leisurely pace and was soon joined by his aunt, her husband, their children, Joy, and to his dismay, the Black Cat, who his cousin would no doubt be feeding at their table. A part of him wanted to just finish and go to his room, but he wouldn't be rude, so instead he looked challengingly at the cat, who thankfully ignored him. "Morning, Aunt Emmon." "Morning, Tyrion. You're up early," Jaina said. I had a visitor this morning," Tyrion said, looking at the cat. "I told you to lock your rooms." "I did. He still manages to get inside," Tyrion said, watching as Joy fed the cat some of her meal. "No, Balon, you no like toast," Joy said, giggling as the cat proved her wrong. At times like this, Tyrion wondered why the cat discomforted him so. There was something about it, though. Something that was off. The cat was protective, almost like Ghost was. But where Ghost's size scared people off, the cat used its claws. That wasn't it, though. It was something else. The cat at times seemed far too intelligent. It seemed like it knew exactly what it was doing. As he was thinking this, the damn thing looked at him and he had enough. He grabbed the last piece of bacon and made his way to his solar, saying his goodbyes to his family as he did so. He was interrupted on his way to the solar, though, by the maester rushing towards him, carrying a scroll. "My lord, a message for you from Lannisport," Craiglan said, handing him the scroll with his uncle's seal on it. He quickly opened it and read it, shocked. "Dornish ships in the bay bearing the Mortell's royal banner. Advise. Caven. Maester, send a message back to my uncle. Tell him I'm on my way." Tyrion said. He quickly called for Daenerys and sent the boy to fetch his aunt, before making his way to his guards to send one of them to fetch the captain of the household guard. And he began to wish he hadn't sent Adam away. Dorne hadn't attended anything in the Seven Kingdoms since not long after the rebellion, at least not officially. Prince Oberyn had attended a tourney which had left the Tyrell heir a cripple, but that had, as far as he knew, been the last time they'd even set foot in the kingdoms. As for the West itself, he knew that Oberyn had come to Casterly Rock with his sister many years before, but with what happened in King's Landing and their rumored involvement in it, the Martells had no love for the Lannisters. His mind raced as he walked to his solar. Why now, of all times, would they come? Was it because his brother was in the north? Was it because of their increased trade deals? Did the Dornish want to open up trading routes with them? While plausible, they were unlikely. He hated not knowing. To be in the dark was not a place he liked to be, especially when it came to a family whose most erratic member was well known for his use of poisons. As he continued to try and figure it out, his aunt and captain of the guards entered the room. He hadn't even heard either of them knock. "Tyrion, what's so important that you've taken me from breaking my fast?" Jaina said, annoyed. "It seems we have visitors, but please, one moment, Aunt. Carl, I need you to arrange a company of men to escort me to Lannisport. A large company, and it needs to be done immediately. Also, I want extra guards on all the gates. No one is allowed access unless it's cleared with my aunt. Is that understood?" "It is, my lord. We shall be ready within the hour," Carl said, and turned to leave. "Tyrion, what's going on? Has something happened? Is anyone hurt?" His aunt said, worried. No one's hurt, Aunt," Tyrion said, and was happy to see his aunt's relief. "Dorne sent some ships to Lannisport, one bearing the royal banner." "What? Why would they?" Jaina asked, dumbfounded. "Exactly what I've been trying to figure out. I need to go to Lannisport, Aunt. I leave the rock in your capable hands," Tyrion said, getting up from his seat. Tyrion, be careful, Jaina said as he left the door. He smiled back at her and almost tripped over the damn black cat as it ran by him, a laughing Joy chasing it. Fallen, no run, walk, Joy said, giggling as she too passed by. Arthur 2094 AC. Arriving in Sunspear, Arthur had found himself caught up in another scheduled departure, one which delayed his own. Finding out that Oberyn was setting off for Lannisport had made him almost stow away on his ship. So worried was he for his king. It was only when he was checking out the ship itself that he began to think straight and remembered that Jaehaerys was in the north and wouldn't be back before he himself made it to the west. Still, it was strange and worrying that Oberyn had chosen now of all times to go west. He would need to keep an eye on his old friend once he got there. It took him almost 3 days to find a ship that was going there. The trade route not one the Dornish used or cared for. And so it was a northern ship he found himself on, one with a very interesting name. The Western Wolf was unlike any ship he'd ever seen before. Larger, sleeker, much faster, and it had taken all his powers of persuasion to even be allowed on board. It seemed the ships didn't usually take passengers, and it was only him telling the man he was trying to make his sister's wedding. That convinced him in the end. The thing which surprised him most, though, was how heavily armed the ship was. There were scorpions and crossbowmen everywhere. When he'd asked, the men just shrugged, saying the ship was too important to be unprotected. Though how any ship could even get close enough to worry it was something he wondered, as within a week of sailing they passed the Dornish ships carrying Oberyn and left them behind. "Thought I'd find you here, Daemon," the large rotund knight said to him. "I like the view, Sir Wylis," Arthur said, smiling at the man. He had considered going by his own name. It had been 10 years since anyone had heard of him after all. But in the end, Daemon Sand seemed a better choice. "Ah, it is a good one," Wylis said as they looked over the deck of the ship. The night sky was clear and the stars were reflecting off the water. "Your ship amazes me still, sir," Arthur said genuinely. "It's a fine ship, is it not? My brother, when he's at sea, commands its brother, but the wolf is mine," Wisely said proudly. "A fine name. The Western Wolf, but you're from the north, are you not?" "I am Daemon and proud of it, but the ship's named after its designer, not I," Wylis said. "Jon Snow, the Western Wolf," Wylis smiled as he said the name. Arthur had to bite his tongue. This was the ship his brother told him about. This was what his king had designed. He looked around it again, and this time he was even more in awe of it. "I've heard of the lad. Didn't he do something with mines or something?" Arthur asked. "I made the Lannisters even more gold," Wylis said, laughing. "Not bad for a bastard," Arthur said. "Jon Snow's as fine a lad as you're like to meet," Wylis said angrily. "I meant no offense, sir. There's nothing wrong with being born on the wrong side of the sheets," Arthur said. "Aye, true that. You would know, too. It's a hard life, but that lad has done so much with his already," Wylis said fondly as he turned to leave. Arthur couldn't do anything but agree. When Ulrich told him of the things Jaehaerys had done, he'd smiled more truly than he had in years. To see Rhaegar's son achieve so much was more than he could have hoped for. When he told him that he had been squire to Jaehaerys Lannister, though it had almost been too much for him, it had taken the rest of the story to stop him leaving for the Rock immediately. His uncle squired him to a man who broke his oath, a man who killed his king. Arthur said angrily. "It was better than the life he would have had, Arthur," Ulrich said. "How can you say that? How is it better? The boy is the king. Had things been different, he'd have grown up a prince with a loving family around him. I was talking about the life he was leading before Jaime Lannister named him squire. What about it? Ned Stark raised him as his bastard son, Arthur. He had really lost it then, Ned. Howland and Jaime, he didn't know which of them he was most angry at. He tried to think reasonably, rationally. Ashau had done her best to calm him down. But it had taken a long time for him to not blame himself. His king had been raised as a bastard, and he had been told he was fine. He was happy. There was no need for him to come home. Had it not been for Jaime Lannister, who knows what life Ned Stark had in mind for him, that alone was something he needed to get his head around. Jaxley had taken Jaehaerys on as a squire. He had trained him well enough that the young boy had won not one but 2 tourneys, and had managed to unhorse Idmir Tully in an honor duel. When he'd heard that, he'd felt so proud of the boy. To hear he had called out the fishes for their duplicity, for their treason, that he'd fought for his father's and mother's honor. Whether it was the boy himself or the lessons Jaxley Tierdoden in Arthur would find out soon enough, but the more he heard, the more eager he was to meet his king. He had deflated when he heard they had headed north, so he considered whether or not he should go and try to meet up with them there. But in the end, Ulrich had been the clearer thinker. What if he got there and missed them? What if they were traveling and he arrived just after they'd left? There was a chance he could make it in time and meet them, but if he didn't, then it would be moons before he caught up with them again. So in the end, he had reluctantly agreed, and it was to Lannisport rather than the north he'd go. "We'll pack our things. Cregan needs to meet his other kin." Asherah said, "As you can't, I need to go alone first. It may not be safe for you and Cregan. I need to see him and decide." Arthur said, "You're not leaving us behind, Arthur. I know that, Ash, I wouldn't dare, but please wait until I'm certain all right." "Fine, I'll wait for now." Asherah said. He took one last look at the sky before heading down to the room he'd been given. It wasn't huge by any means, but compared to most cabins he'd stayed in on a ship, it was enormous, comfortable too, and within a short time of laying on the bed, he was asleep. When he woke the next morning, he felt the ship was motionless. He jumped up and threw some water on his face and quickly left the room. His sword was ready to be drawn at a moment's notice, and though not drawn, it would serve him well if needed. Something he found it was not when he reached the deck, and saw they were already docked in Lannisport. He saw Sir Wylis, who gave him a quick smile. You're up, Daemon. I was about to send for you, but figured you'd wake when you did. When did we arrive?" "Early this morning. You ever been here before?" "No," Arthur lied. "Well, I'd recommend the Golden Maiden. It's got some decent rooms, and the food's good. Does a good northern ale, too." Wylis smirked. "I thank you, sir, for the voyage and the company." Arthur stuck his hand out. "It was a pleasure, Daemon. Should you ever find yourself in White Harbor, you'd be more than welcome at the Mormon's Court," Wylis said, shaking the offered hand. Arthur smiled at the man and left the ship. It took him almost an hour to find the tavern Wylis recommended. But when he did, he was glad for it. He broke his fast on a decent meal of eggs and bacon with a fresh lemon after it. Before being shown to the room he'd taken, the price was a little expensive, but it was worth it, he supposed. Placing his things in a small chest at the end of the bed, he decided he'd familiarize himself with the town and with the rock once more, but hearing a knock at the door, he went to answer it. "It's been a long time, old friend," Richard Longmouth said as he walked into the room. "John Aaron, 2184, AC. Every single time he heard news concerning Jaime Lannister or Jon Snow, it ended up with his ire being raised, and this was no different. Jaime Lannister marrying a heathen was something he would never in his wildest nightmares even contemplate. That a southern lord of his standing would marry a tree worshipper was beyond him. He had spent the day going over his books and seeing if there was a legal way to strip him of this wardenship. He had read up on other houses in the West to see if there was one who could take over, all to no avail. He knew it was a nonsense of an idea, and yet he'd wasted his day all because Jaime Lannister's pet bastard had somehow managed to get him to marry a damn northerner. He had even scheduled a meeting with the High Septon, only to find that not only was he married already in one faith, but he had sent word that he'd also be marrying in the light of the Seven at a ceremony in Casterly Rock. The High Septon had been incredibly pleased by this turn of events, as no doubt he too worried about the loss of influence, or more likely the loss of gold should the Lannisters turn from the light. For Jon, though, it was incredibly annoying that there was nothing he could do about it, that rather than bring the heathens to the light, it seemed the reverse was happening. This had not been the plan. All those years of work, all the plans he made, and even after getting rid of the dragon and his northern whore, the damn wolves still caused him problems. To think it was a bastard wolf only made it worse. He picked his cup up and threw it against the wall, but watching it break didn't alleviate his frustration at all. "My lord, is everything all right?" Yes, it's fine. Send someone to clean this, and get me the Master of Coin," Jon said. "At once, my lord," the steward said as he left with the 2 guards. Jon hadn't even noticed. He hadn't been this angry since he'd heard what Jon Snow and the Tyrell girl had done with their coin. Spending coin on the small folk was all well and good. Spending their coin, however, was not. He'd been almost apoplectic when he heard. It was only made worse when Jaime Lannister had done the same with his. "He did what?" "Apparently, he and the young Rose used the coin to buy food for the small folk in Flea Bottom," Patter said. "They used my coin for this?" Jon asked. "Why, my Lord Hand?" Apparently Lord Jaime has given his winnings too. When he had told Robert the stupid fool had just laughed. Just like Ned he is. The king had shouted happily. God, sometimes he wondered if he'd made a huge mistake with that boy. He still to this day had a blind spot over Ned Stark, one which it seemed had now extended to the bastard too. But then again, Robert could never face a hard truth. And even now, despite everything, had rewritten Lyanna Stark into the love of his life, when the woman had wanted nothing to do with him. He could still remember the crying, pathetic mess that was Robert when she had told him she'd never marry him. It had taken him hours to fix that one. In the fool's mind, she's just playing hard to get Robert. Don't you love the thrill of the chase? Oh, there was a time when he could convince Robert to jump when he said so, something that lately was becoming so much harder. You called for me, my lord, Petter said, entering the room, and Jon smiled warmly at his friend. I did, Petter. Did you hear the news of Jaime Lannister? I did, my lord. It's surprising, is it not? I heard her grace did not take it well at all. No, she did not petir, Jon said, shuddering at his remembrance of the queen's rage. So how may I help, my lord? Pody said, and Jon felt thankful that at least one person around here, apart from himself, seemed to understand things. Those plans you had in relation to the Lancetors, are they underway? They are ready to be, my lord, should I proceed. Yes, hurt them, Petir, hurt them a lot. I will, my lord, will see the benefits quite soon, Petter said, and got up to leave. Jon poured himself a glass of wine and drank it slowly. They needed coin, and these plans of Peter's would provide a lot of it. Once he fixed that problem, he could then begin to look into the others. Marguerite 2093 AC. They had finally arrived, and as she got out of the wheelhouse, Marguerite couldn't stop the smile from appearing on her face. Highgarden was such a welcome sight. She rushed forward and embraced Willis, having not seen him for what felt like an age, and after doing so, she did the same to Garland, who she had not expected to see. Welcome home, my sweet sister. May I introduce you to Lady Lyanette Fossaway, Garland said. My lady, it's an honor to meet you, Marguerite said with a curtsy. The honor is mine, my lady, Lyanette said, matching her curtsy. It took a few more minutes for the introductions to be completed. Marjorie could see that her grandmother was getting impatient, especially upon meeting Lady Lynette's parents. She took her grandmother by the arm, and together they moved inside. It was rude, technically, but she saw the smile Garland gave her and the relief on the Fossaways' faces, so she knew it was appreciated. Even her grandmother seemed to enjoy it, given the half-smile on her face as they walked. Afraid I was about to bite into an apple sweetling, Olenna said, smirking. No, grandmother. Afraid you were about to devour one, Marjorie said, and her grandmother laughed. When she got to her room, she jumped on her bed. She had enjoyed her time in the capital. She and Jon had done something incredible, something worthwhile. Yet despite that, it was her time spent with Jon that she thought most on. Seeing her brothers when she arrived home reminded her of the one not here, which in turn reminded her of Jon. How long would it be until she saw them both again? She wondered as she lay in her bed, drifting off to sleep. She couldn't help but think about when she would dance again. It was a few hours later that she woke up and she was a mess, her hair tangled, the dress crumpled, and she looked embarrassingly at the pillow she had wrapped herself around and blushed at the dream she had woken from. She called for her handmaiden, and after changing and dressing, she was ready for the world once more. She headed for the hall, as it would soon be time for dinner. When she arrived, it seemed everyone was in a joyous mood. Marguerite, my dear, come, we have such wondrous news, her mother called. But given the look her grandmother was giving her, she didn't find it so wondrous. Of course, Mama, she said, taking her seat. My dear, your brother Garland is to be wed to Lady Lyanette, her mother said, her smile bright. Oh, Mother, that is wonderful. Brother, my lady, I am overjoyed for you both. Marjorie said, her own smile just as bright. I thank you, my lady, Lynette said, and Marjorie looked to see the girl's parents looking proudly at their daughter. She looked to her brother, who looked happier than she could ever remember him being. Willis, too, looked happy, though he was a little more reserved. And was that a little tinge of regret she saw? Her grandmother looked proud, too, though she looked more at Marjorie than Garland for some reason. The meal they shared was as good as she remembered, and the dessert was far better. Even though it was just family and not an announced betrothal, the meal was still extravagant. And at one point, seeing the waste, Marjorie felt guilty, thinking of those back in King's Landing. Before the feelings could take shape, though her mother whispered in her ear, "There are some letters for you, sweetling, Master Lomace. Drop them off." "Letters from whom, Mother?" Marjorie asked, her voice quiet though full of excitement. "From the north, my dear," Ellery said, and Marjorie smiled as she took them. There were 3 in all, 2 letters and a raven, one sealed with a rose, the other two sealed with a dire wolf, and she had to resist the urge to charge back to her bedroom to read them. Instead, she carefully placed them in the pocket in her dress and waited an appropriate amount of time before asking to be excused. Once she left the hall, she hurried back to her room and almost impatiently sat while her handmaiden let down her hair and helped her from her dress. Bidding the girl good night, she grabbed the letters and jumped into the bed to read them, starting with the Raven first. Just Marjorie, we have arrived in the north safe and well, though I find myself missing your company greatly. I wish you could be here to see my homeland, but perhaps someday you'll allow me to take you to visit. Until then, I shall have to settle for the favor you gave me and know that I carry a piece of you with me always. Just Jon. She leaned over to her jewelry box and opened it, taking the small handkerchief out and placing the Raven scroll carefully inside it, beside her other letters. Laying back on the bed, she wiped her face softly with the handkerchief before turning over to read her brother's letter. My dearest sister, the north is well, it's cold. That's the first thing you should know. Very, very cold. It's also quite beautiful, though, in its own way. Not like Highgarden and the Reach. Not as colorful, but beautiful in its grays and darkness. Jon and I are enjoying it almost as much as Ghost is. The wolf seems happiest out of all of us to be back in the north. White Harbor is an incredible city, though, and the Manderleys are very friendly. We've made some new friends, and Lord Manderley's granddaughters do love to dance. I miss you all so very much, you especially, sister. I look forward to seeing you all soon. Love, Loras. Margaery frowned at that. Why would Loras put that in about Lord Manderley's granddaughters? Did he dance with them? Did Jon, would his birth not matter to the Lord of White Harbor? She began to think of all she knew of the Manderleys. Jon had helped them with trade, with ships. He was from the north. A son, even though a natural one, of their liege lord. Would that make up for... She couldn't think. She quickly opened up Jon's letter, her mind not helping her at all. Just Marjorie. I hope this letter finds you well, and that our project in the capital is not causing you too much discomfort. I feel terrible that I've left it all in your hands, though I know of no one I could think of who could do a better job. While I'm happy to be back in the north, and to have the chance to visit my family, I wish it didn't need to be so. I wish I was free to travel to Highgarden to see your home. Though perhaps it is the company, more than the place, I wish for most. Were you here with me then? Perhaps it is that which would make this journey more tolerable. Or was I there with you then, perhaps? I may not miss the north so. What I do know is that I miss you. I miss your smile and your laughter, and I miss our dances, so perhaps I know something after all. I look forward to seeing you when I return, and each day we travel, I know that return grows closer. Each morning when I wake, I look at the favor you gave me and do the same each night. And though it's not the same as speaking to you, I find myself occasionally speaking to it as if you were here with me in its stead. Ghost misses you too, though he'd never say, but I know he misses the pats you give him on his head and the rubs he gets on his belly. Loras too, though he too remains silent, but I can tell he misses family, and you most of all. So remember, my lady, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, you are missed and thought about always. Just Jon? Marjorie felt the tears well up in her eyes and took the handkerchief to wipe them. She looked back down at the letter and felt herself smile. She read it once more and placed it among the others in her jewelry box and lay back down on her pillow. Turning over to go to sleep, she whispered, I miss you too. Just Jon. Old Nan T3 AC. The crypt was cold and dark, and yet for Nan it was still the place she felt most comfortable. She walked among the statues and felt her sadness rise as she came to the three newest ones. Rickard's raised feelings that contradicted each other. She was sad her lord was gone, and yet he was in some ways the cause of things. His desire to be closer to the south, his wish to be more than he was, had in some ways led to what occurred. Had he heeded his children, then Brandon would be with the woman he wished for, and Lyanna, poor Lyanna. She moved to her statue and closed her eyes, picturing the girl as she really was, and not this poor imitation of her that the statue represented. It didn't show her as the horsewoman or the wild little thing she had been in life. It didn't depict her fighting with her own precious Walder she had forbidden him to fight, but could not refuse when it was Lyanna. If her brothers refused her, then Walder was always ready to step in. He'll be here soon, my lady, she said as she touched her hand to the statue before leaving the crypt. Making her way around the yard, she watched as the Greyjoy boy snuck out, no doubt, off to Wintertown again. She shook her head in disappointment. What Ned was thinking was beyond her. An Ironborn here in these halls was bad enough, but to treat him as a ward was absolutely crazy. To see how he'd influenced young Robb was even worse. But then again, it had been a long time since a proper wolf resided in this castle. Entering the keep, she met her boy, and though all the rest looked at Walder with pity, she herself could not. He was her blood, and what difference did his words make? "Hodor," Walder said happily when he saw her. "Have you eaten, Walder?" "Hodor," he said, nodding. "Good, you need to get your bath ready." Hodo, he said, shaking his head. "Walder, you know it's time." "Hodor," he said softly before walking away. Once upon a time, her boy could speak. He could talk and smile, and he could make her laugh with his japes back when the wolves roamed these halls and the pack was all that matters. She looked to the table to see Ned and his wife, and though in some ways they were the perfect lord and lady, in others they didn't belong here. In another life, it would be Brandon and his beloved sitting up there. Perhaps then Ned and Catelyn would have been in a place more suited to them, a place where southern courtesies and northern steel would be far more suited than here in the wolf's den. "Jon will be here tomorrow, really, father," Sansa said happily. "Aye, my love. That's what Alyn and Weil said when Jory sent them back. Is Lady Daisy with them and Lady Lannister? I'm so looking forward to the wedding, father," Sansa said while Aeron Bran looked on. "I don't think so, Sansa. I believe they went back to Bear Island," Lady Catelyn said grumpily. "But the wedding's still going ahead?" Sansa asked worriedly. "Aye, it is, my love," Ned said, and the lady grimaced. Nan looked at the children. None of them were wolves either, but they would be soon, she thought as she left the hall. She walked to the room she'd spent almost 70 years in. She was tired but excited, and though she wasn't in the humor to sleep, she felt the need to do so. The pup would be returning tomorrow, and the wolves would howl once more. Jon! Traveling along the King's Road was far easier than being off the beaten track. The gift itself was amazing and so underused. Good land, fertile, there were more than enough trees to build homes and villages, and the sheer amount of rivers, lakes, and streams which littered the land made water a non-issue. Yet the place was deserted, almost devoid of life. Well, people anyway. There was plenty of life to be had, as Ghost had proved ever since they set off from Castle Black. The White Wolf was in his element out here. During the day, he'd roam free far ahead of them. Every so often, Jon would use his time to warg into Ghost, and each time it was the same. He'd find that door wide open and welcoming, and inside he'd go. Seeing through the wolf's eyes was almost indescribable. He could see further, make things out more clearly, and when added to the other senses, his own felt inadequate. Sense would rise, and he found with practice he could differentiate between them. Man, woman, horse, deer, rabbit, mouse, he could pinpoint each with ease. Right now, Ghost was stalking a deer which had no idea of the danger it was in. So Jon broke off their connection. He had found that when Ghost ate and they were connected, he too could taste the meal, and he really hated the taste of blood. "Where is he?" Jajin asked. "He's a few miles ahead of us. He's caught a deer," Jon said. "The connection with him, is it still as easy?" With the others it takes a little while. With Ghost it's instant. It's like he's waiting for me," Jon said, smiling. It didn't take them long to reach the evidence of Ghost's kill. The deer carcass had been stripped, and laying to one side, looking mightily pleased with himself, was the not-so-white wolf. Luckily, they had passed a stream a mile or so back. Jon looked at the wolf, who did not want to follow before he turned his horse to head to the stream. It took a moment for the reluctant wolf to move, but he did, and they set off. "We shouldn't be long, my lord," Jon said to Jaime as he pointed towards the stream, and the wolf and Jaime nodded. Loras rode up beside him, and they and their guards set off, the ride to the stream taking them but a few moments. Once they got there, it took him a much longer amount of time to get the wolf to jump into the water itself. The area they were in was not far from where the Mormonts would split off from their party to head to Bear Island. Something Jon wasn't looking forward to. Jaime had been happier than ever since they left Castle Black, he and Daisy closer and more free with their affections. Knowing that they were getting closer to saying goodbye to each other, even if it was temporary, had seen the moods change the last day or two. It would be more than a moon before they saw each other again. And Jon feared that Jaime's mood would change for the worst without Daisy around. Though given the next time they'd meet, they'd be wed, perhaps Jaime would bear it easier than Jon suspected. He was taken from his thoughts by the splashing of water and then Ghost jumping excitedly, and then looked on in amazement at the large salmon Ghost had in his mouth. "Really? A deer not enough for you?" he said to the wolf, much to the amusement of Loras and the guards. "It would seem not." Lord yapped, and they watched on as Ghost devoured the large fish. Once done, they hurried back to the others, not wanting to fall too far behind. They caught up with them just in time. It seemed as they had indeed reached the split-off point. Riding up beside the others, Jon and Loras dismounted and walked over to say their farewells. For now to Daisy and her sisters, and for a little while longer to Jorah and Lyness. "My lady, my lord," Jon said as he reached Jorah. "Ah, Jon, we thought we might not get the chance to bid you farewell," Jorah said. "It's been a pleasure traveling with you, my lord, my lady. I look forward to seeing you again soon," Jon said. "Ah, you too, lad. Bear Island is most grateful for what you've done for her, as am I. I hope you visit one day," Jorah said. "I shall, my lord," Jon said before turning to Lyness. "My lady, I wish you all the best health for you and the babe." "I thank you, Jon, for everything," Lyness said. Jon watched as she said her goodbyes to Loras, giving her nephew a large hug and mussing his hair, which made them both giggle. He said his own goodbyes then to Loras and Jory, both of them too, asking him to come visit Bear Island, and saying that they'd see him in Winterfell. He saw Jaime and Daisy say their own farewells and turned away to allow them some privacy. When they were done, Daisy came over to him and whispered in his ear, "Look after him, will you?" "I will, my lady, always," Jon said, and she smiled at him before mounting her horse. Jon did likewise as soon as Jaime did. He thought of going over to speak to his lord, but decided not to. He knew by the look that Jaime was giving Daisy that right now he didn't wish for comfort from anyone but her. They stayed there for a few more minutes watching the Mormonts and their guards leave, before turning off to head in the opposite direction. They were no more than a day away from Last Hearth according to the small Jon, so should reach it on the morrow. Jaime, saying goodbye to Daisy had been hard, and had it been for longer than the moon or so they'd be apart, he didn't know if he would have been able to do it. From the moment she'd agreed to be his wife, Jaime had found that he looked forward to his days just that little bit more, his company just that little bit more. If finding Jon had given him purpose, then finding Daisy had brought him happiness. For the first time in his life, it was as if both sides of his heart were truly beating. The man he'd wanted to be, Kingsguard, knight, honorable. Before meeting Jon, he assumed that man to be long dead and buried. But buried though he was, deep inside him, the man wasn't dead. He was instead waiting to be reborn, and his king had made that happen. The man he never thought he could be, the one with a wife who loved him as much as he loved her. He too, he had thought to be long dead, only to find that to be far from the truth. Years earlier, he had said goodbye to a woman he thought he loved. He had been the one to ride off. Then and at the time, he had thought, this is how it feels. This is what it's like to leave the other side of your heart behind. How wrong he was. Saying goodbye to Cersei was nothing like this. Within moments of doing so, he'd forgotten about her, and was thinking more of the adventure he was undertaking. Saying goodbye to Daisy, though. "It will only be a moon or so, Jaime, and then we'll be wed." Daisy said softly, "What if I can't go a moon without you?" Jaime said with a small smirk, though there was some truth in his words. "Then, my lord, we are done for," Daisy said, kissing him softly. "I love you." "I love you too." He looked to his side to see Ghost had joined him, which in turn had meant the small Jon suddenly felt the need to ride elsewhere. Laughing, he nodded to the wolf, and they continued to ride on. After riding through a forest, they came to the Umber homestead. Last Hearth stood atop a small mountain, which you had to ride a circular path to reach the keep itself. As he looked at it in the distance, he felt it was an excellent defensive position. This keep wouldn't fall easily, and certainly not by surprise. "My lord," Jon said, riding towards him with Loras. "Jon, Loras, that path looks tricky," Lord said. "Not really," Jon said, pointing to Ghost, who was racing up ahead of them. "Well, we'd better not keep Lord Umber waiting," Jaime said, and they set off towards the path. Loras was right. It was tricky. Some parts were slick, and while it was large enough for horses to ride 4 abreast, they found quickly the edges were far too dangerous, and so they rode single file. Though it didn't seem to bother the small Jon or the Umbermen as they rode as normal, Ghost too had no problem with the path. When they reached the keep itself, Jaime was far less impressed. While old and definitely sturdy, Last Hearth was probably the least welcoming place he'd ever seen, and that included Castle Black. The walls were dark and gray, and covered in snow and ice. The doors, though big and imposing, were made of a dark wood, which only reinforced the overall darkness of the keep itself. It looked cold, and seeing the 3 large men in the household ready to welcome them were all dressed in big furs, Jaime knew it would be. As for the Umbers themselves, the Great Jon was an absolute beast of a man. Though not a lot taller than his son, in sheer size he was far bigger. The other 2 men were equally as big. One was wearing an eye patch, and was dressed in a white bear cloak, which had as its hood the bear's head. The other man was thinner and more gaunt, with a snowy white beard, and dark eyes. Jaime looked to the large lord who was looking at him distrustfully and then back to Jon, who in turn did not look happy about the Great Jon's expression. He smiled and dismounted, and was immediately joined by Jon, Loras, and Ghost, who caused a stir. "Is that... It can't be. A dire wolf," Great Jon said loudly. "Aye, father, that's Jon's wolf." "Snow, come here, lad. Let me look at ya," Great Jon said, and Jon stepped forward. "Ah, yes, stark true and true, be welcome at last, hearth lad." The Great Jon set a large smile on his face. "I thank you, my lord. May I introduce Lord Jaime Lannister?" Jon said, and Jaime moved forward. "Lord Umber, I thank you for what hospitality." "Aye, welcome, Lord Lannister," the Great Jon's greeting much less friendly. "Lord Lorsiern," Jane said, and the Great Jon turned to meet Loras and welcomed him little better. "Lord Josen and Lady Mira Reed." Jon introduced both the Reed children, and they got the same welcome Jon did. "I know your father well. A fine man," the Great Jon boomed happily. "Thank you, my lord." A woman came out holding a tray with some bread and salt on it, and Jaime smirked. Well, if nothing else, he'd not be getting murdered here, he thought as he took a piece of each. "Well, come, we'll show you to your rooms and we'll feast tonight, Lord Jaime Snow," the Great Jon said before he and all the rest of the Umbers quickly went inside. While still not comforting, the inside was far better and, thankfully, far warmer than the outside. They were shown to some quite decent rooms, and he was glad to see his own had a fire already roaring in the hearth. Jon and Loras joined him after leaving their chests in their own rooms. They would only stay here a day or so, though, all of them eager to make the journey to Winterfell. "Not exactly friendly, is he?" Loras said. "No, this is the North Loras. They don't think highly of Southerners," Jon said. The Mormonts weren't like that. Even the small Jon was far friendlier. Loras did, and Jaime laughed. "They know us, Loras. The Northmen don't trust what they don't know. Isn't that right, Jon?" "It is, my lord, which is why I was wondering if I should speak to the Great Jon myself." "Why?" "I think the trade deal will go better coming from me. It was the same with the Manderleys, my lord." "Very well, you know the details better than I, anyway," Jaime said, getting a laugh. "That's because you only like playing with your sword, my lord," Jon jabbed. "Why you? Who said that?" Jaime said in mock outrage. "3 guesses," Jon said. "It was my aunt, wasn't it?" "Aye, my lord," Jon said, and this time they all laughed a little. "Loras had better get some rest. Don't you think, my lord?" "What, I'm not tired," Loras said grumpily. "Loras, you're about to have to suffer through a proper northern feast. Trust me, you will be," as Jaime said, causing Jon to laugh loudly. Jon, walking through the Umber Keep with a large white direwolf, was Jon found out a good way to make sure you were not disturbed or bothered. The servants avoided him, the guards moved to one side, and Jon was free to walk all the way to where he assumed the Great Jon's solar was. Given the shouts coming from inside the room, he had found the right place. "What were you thinking, boy?" "I was thinking the trade deal we were being offered was too good to turn down." "You think I care for coin?" "I think we could use the damn thing. Not enough to get in bed with the damn Kingslayer, we can't." "He's a good man, father. He's marrying Daisy Mormont. What other Southerner you think would do that?" "I don't know or care what the hell the Mormonts are thinking. Though I'm sure Meg will have something to say about it. You brought the damn Kingslayer to my homeboy." Jon enough, he moved to the door, and the guard tried to stop him, only for Ghost to knock him off his feet. Once he did, Jon pushed the door open to the shock of the men inside the room. "Snow, what are you doing?" the Great Jon shouted as he stood up. "How dare you, my lord? You speak of a man you know nothing about, a man who's done more for the North than any Southerner has ever done before him. You speak of him in such a way. What of honor, my lord? Where is the honor of speaking of a guest in such a manner? You're speaking of the Kingslayer, Snow. It is not your place." "Not my place. My lord, I know the man better than any of you here. I know how much he's helped the North, how much he's done for it. He comes here to offer to help you too, and your stubborn pride blinds you to old prejudices." He broke his oath. "Snow. An oath to a mad king, my lord. A mad king who, I may remind you, killed my grandfather and uncle. Your liege lord and his heir. Or have you forgotten, my lord?" "I have not forgotten. I will never forget. Yet the man who brought justice to my family for their deaths is treated with such disrespect. I will not stand for it. My lord, myself and my companions shall take our leave. I have no desire to share a hall with you, my lord, not after this." Jon turned and walked away, leaving the men in shock. He stormed back to his room and slammed the door behind him. When he entered, Ghost stood beside him and brushed against him, and yet even rubbing his hand in his wolf's fur could not calm the rage Jon felt. Jon deserved not only their respect but their gratitude, yet they were too closed-minded to see it. Men like the great Jon weren't fit to carry Jaime sword. As he pushed the clothes he'd taken out of the chest back inside it, Loras entered the room, seeing his friend's distress. He quickly walked over to Jon, who still hadn't calmed. "Jon, what's wrong?" Loras asked concernedly. "These men, these foolish men, it's no wonder the North is thought so badly in the South. It's full of close-minded fools." "What happened?" "They disrespected Jaime, these fools who aren't worth even one part of him, disrespected a far better man than any of them could even dream of being," Jon said angrily. "Jane, you knew they would. Is that not why you went to speak to them yourself?" It is, but Loras," Jon said as he sat down resignedly. "How did you leave it?" Loras asked. "I told them we were leaving," Jon said. "Jon, we can't. It's getting on. It'll be dark soon. We have to stay." I know, Jon said, shaking his head. "Wait here," Loras said, and Jon nodded while he left the room. Jon sat on the bed and felt himself grow embarrassed. Had he overreacted? Did he go too far? He had felt such rage, such anger when he heard them speak of Jaime that way. But was he right to? Would it not have been better to show a different side? To stay calm and persuade? He wasn't sure what was the right thing to do. Standing up for Jaime was, though. Of that he was certain, but perhaps he should have done it differently. Lucians came back a few minutes later with Jaime and Jon, couldn't look him in the eye. He had let him down. He felt it keenly as Jaime sat down on the bed beside him. Not a word spoken, and just an arm placed around his shoulder. He closed his eyes to stop the onset of tears, not wanting to cry in front of Loras and Jaime, not for this, not now. "You know I'm supposed to be the impulsive one with a temper, right?" Jaime said, and he laughed. I did learn from you after all," Jon said to more laughter. "You think we should leave?" Jaime asked. "No, Loras was right. We have to stay. We can leave on the morrow." "Fine. I'll go talk to the great Jon." "My lord?" Jon asked. "It's fine, Jon. Leave it to me, Loras." Jaime said, and he nodded. He watched as Loras and Jaime left the room and then went to lay down on the bed. He was supposed to be the one who smoothed things over in the North, and instead, he'd made things worse. Now Jaime and Loras would have to go and apologize for his behavior and hope the Great Chain allowed them to stay. Everything he'd said to the Great Chain had been right. He'd been right to say it, and yet he'd been a fool, too, for not thinking more clearly about the consequences of the simple loss of control he'd had. Lorsius, seeing how angry Jon was, had been a surprise to Loras. He'd not seen his friend that way before, but it was no surprise. It had been because of Lord Jaime that he'd lost his temper. Jon and he were a lot alike in certain respects, and especially when it came to people they cared about. He also knew that Lord Jaime's relationship with Jon was even closer than his own with the Lord. He had wondered if they were doing the best thing to leave him alone in his room, but Jaime had reassured him, and so now they were walking to meet Lord Amber. He didn't know what to expect from the Lord of Last Hearth when they arrived today. All Jon had told him was the great Jon was a typical Northman. He'd asked Shojin and Miro what that meant. They said loud, proud, and prone to anger. When they reached the solar, they found 2 guards who looked at them both oddly before checking behind them, and then a moment later they were brought in to see Lord Amber. "My lord," Jaime said. "Lord Jaime," the great Jon replied. "I believe I owe you an apology, my lord," Jaime said. "My lord?" The great Jon looked at them both before looking to his son and the other thinner man with the beard they'd met earlier. Hodder, he thought. He thought his name was... "For my squire's behavior," Jaime said. "No, my lord, you do not." Young Snow spoke truly, and harsh though it was, he was right to do so, the great Jon said to both Jaime and his surprise. "My lord, I don't understand," Jaime said. "I spoke out of turn. Lord Jack May," the lad corrected me, fiercely, I may add, great Jon said, a smile. Now on his face, "According to my son, his wolf's just as fierce." He laughed loudly. "Aye, that is true, my lord," Jaime said, with a snigger. "I congratulate you, my lord, on your upcoming wedding. Lady Dacey's a fine woman." "That she is my lord," Jaime said, smiling, which made the great Jon smile too. "We shall feast tonight, my lord, to your upcoming wedding and to our new trade deal." "We shall, my lord," Jaime said, and the great Jon nodded to a guard who sent a woman in carrying some ale. "To the Lannisters and the Umbers," the great Jon said, grabbing a mug. The Umbers and the Lannisters, Jaime said, and the Great Jon laughed, while both men did their best to empty the mugs quickly, something which they managed within a moment of each other. Leaving the room after Jaime and the Great Jon had another mug of ale and laughed about a tourney that Jaime had won, he and Jaime headed down the corridor and walked back towards their own. Loras walked silently beside Jaime, who was at times shaking his head and at times laughing a little. When they got to Jon's room and checked in on him, he was asleep. So he and Jaime walked back to Jaime's room, and once inside, Loras could bear it no more. "What just happened, my lord?" Loras asked. "Northmen, Loras, they're a different breed. Don't ever forget that." "Aye, my lord, I know, but I don't understand." Jon, standing up to the Great Jon, actually impressed the man. He made him think, almost as if the man was waiting for him to do so. Jaime said, "You're right, my lord. Northmen are odd," Loras said, and Jaime laughed loudly. "Now go get some rest. Jon was right earlier. A northern feast is much different." Loras did as he was told and went back to his room, though he wasn't tired in the least. Instead, he lay down on his bed and just waited. Eventually, though, he did doze off for an hour or two and was woken up by knocking on his door. Getting up and walking to it, he found a serving girl carrying some water in a jug and some towels at the door. When he opened it, he quickly took the things and washed himself to get ready for the upcoming feast. It was while doing so that Jon knocked before entering. "Are you all right?" Loras asked. "Aye, Loras, I am. Shania told me what happened with the Great Jon." I got lucky," Jon said. "Well, sometimes it's good to be lucky, is it not?" Loras smirked as he finished readying himself. "Come on, we'll need to find a nice umbrelass for you to dance with." Jon Jep and Loras shook his head. "You're the dancer, Jon. I'll sit and watch." Finishing up, they left the room and headed to meet up with Mira, Jojen, and Jaime, finding the two reeds already ready and waiting, but having to wait a little longer for Jaime. When he did appear, all five of them followed a servant down to the main hall to find the feast had already begun. It seemed the Umbers didn't care too much for ceremony, which actually Loras found he really liked, as the introductions to these things usually went on for as long as the feasts themselves. They were escorted to different tables, the Umber High table for Jaime and the one directly below it for Jon himself and the Reeds. Sitting at the table were a couple of younger boys and one girl of around Mira's age. As they took their seats, the feast both began in earnest, and the introductions were made first by the Great Jon and then to each other around the table. "Quiet," the Great Jon's voice boomed out. "That's better. Now if I may introduce our guests for this feast. Lord Jaime Lannister, the Warden of the West, and a friend of the Umbers." The Great Jon shouted loudly, and Loras heard mugs banged on table and saw Jon looking surprised. "Jon Snow, son of our liege lord and friend of the Umbers," the Great Jon added, and motioned for Jon to stand up. "Lord Loras Tyrell, friend of the Umbers, Lord Jerson Reed, Lady Mira Reed, friend of the Umbers," the Great Jon continued, and the banging grew louder. "I bid you all welcome to Last Hearth and offer you meat and mead and warm place to stay, should ever the need arise. My lords, my lady, the Umbers wish you well," the Great Jon finished, to loud cheers. Jon looked almost as shocked as he himself was feeling. He knew they'd smoothed things over with the man earlier, but Loras hadn't expected such a warm welcome as this, and couldn't help but smile at the look on Jon's face. Though the smile was soon wiped from his own when the girl sitting to his right began making the introductions. "May I introduce my brothers and myself? I am Lyder Umber, my brothers Hoarfrost and Brandon," the large girl said with a smile which Loras did his best to return. Her two brothers looked to be even younger then. Jon and Ian yet were already of a size with them, while Loyar was a good half a head taller than he was, and was heavier built than either he or Jon. He did find, though, that her company was far different than the southern ladies, and while he danced with her, eventually it was actually fun, as she seemed to have no interest in him whatsoever. Instead, it was Jojen who received most of her real attention, much to Mira's glee. "Janan, if meeting with Lord Umber earlier didn't show the man liked his ale, then sitting at a feasting table with him." "Certainly did." Jaime had barely finished one, while the man had emptied at least 3. As he was going for the 4th, though, his son stood up and called Jon over. "Jon, come here," the small Jon shouted, and stayed standing. When Jon came over, "My lord," Jon said, as he arrived at the table, a look of apprehension on his face. "These fools don't believe me about the ice, Jon," the small Jon sniggered. "Aye, a foolish idea, Snow. Who'd want ice and why?" Mort set his eye patch, now gone, and replaced with what looked to be a shiny black rock. "Can you get me some ice, my lord?" Jon said, looking to a curious Great Jon. "Aye, ice, we have plenty of snow," the man replied, sending a servant to grab a chunk of ice. While around them the feast was still going on, Jaime noticed a fair few eyes were looking up at the high table. Jon stood there and waited, and within a few moments the servant came back carrying a large chunk of ice, which he placed on the table. "See, worthless," the Great Jon said, while both he and the small Jon smirked. Jon took out a small knife and began to chip away at the ice, knocking small pieces off of it. When he was satisfied, he reached out for an empty mug and placed the ice inside before asking for and receiving a jug of ale, which he poured over the ice. "My lord, drink slowly," Jon said, and the room erupted in laughter as the Great Jon's own boomed out. "It's a hard task you're setting me, lad, but I'll try," the Great Jon said to even more laughter. Jaime watched as the Great Jon took a small unsure sip of the ale before taking a larger one. He looked on as the smile appeared on the man's face and watched as he held the mug almost reverently in his hand. "You need to try this," he said loudly, while Jon chipped more ice and placed it in more mugs. Soon more and more people were looking for ice to be added to their drinks. The servants were sent scurrying off to find some more, and people began chipping the ice themselves and adding it. It was a few minutes later when the Great Jon shouted loudly, my head, it hurts," he shouted, as the Small Jon doubled over in laughter. "He told you to drink slowly, father," Small Jon said to loud cheers. After the pain in the man's head had gone away, Jon was asked to explain more about the ice trade and what it could do for the North. He could see the Great Jon's eyes light up when Jon said he'd figured out how to move it, something he had shown him while they were in Castle Black. After that, the rest of the night passed pretty much without incident until Ghost showed up. Where the wolf had been, he didn't know nor how it made it into the hall without being seen. But hearing the almost woman-like scream from the Great Jon when the wolf's head appeared out of nowhere from behind him, just to help himself to a leg of chicken from his plate, was something he'd smile about for a long time. Jon came and grabbed the wolf away, though the leg of chicken, much to the Great Jon's annoyance, it seemed was the price of the wolf's compliance. With Jon bidding his good nights, soon Loras and the Reeds did likewise, and if Jaime had been a fool, he'd have expected that to signal the winding down of the feast. However, that was certainly not the case in the North. Instead, it ramped it up. The Great Jon actually sang, and Jaime was stunned to learn the man had a pretty good voice. Particularly if the song was a sad one, it seemed. His last memory of the night was when at some point an argument between the Great Jon and his son had broken out over something or other. It led to the two men stripping off their shirts and wrestling in the middle of the floor. Who won Jaime would never know, as when he woke up half-dressed, laying on his bed the next morning, he could barely remember much of the evening after that point. He dressed, washed, and staggered to the hall to break his fast to find some others in the same condition as he was, though the Great Jon was as loud and boisterous as ever. "Oh, good of you to join us, Lord Jaime." "Good morning, my lord." The morning's conversation passed him by. Truth be told, he heard Jon speak of shipping the ice and thought he heard something about the Bay of Seals, but beyond that, not very much at all. After eating, they quickly began their preparations to leave. Winterfell was at least 2 weeks away, and they wished to have full days of travel to make it as quickly as they could. It didn't take too long for them to be ready to set off. Without the extra supplies and the carts, they were able to travel a lot faster, though they still stopped regularly to rest up. "I bid you all a safe travel, my lord. I wish I could come with you to Winterfell, but I have things I must do here. However, I shall do my best, so that either I or my son arrive in time to see you wed," the Great Jon said as they lined up to say their goodbyes. "I thank you, Lord Umber, for your welcome and hospitality. I look forward to our business together." Jaime replied, "I too, my lord. Jon Snow, it was good to meet you, lad, though I dare not say the same about the White Wolf." Both the Great Jon and the Small Jon looked warily at Ghost, who basically ignored them. "I thank you, my lord, and I apologize for my words," Jon said, and the Great Jon just smiled. "You're a wolf, Jon. Wolves don't apologize," the Great Jon said, slapping him hard on the back. "Now be off with you all. You should make it to the King's Road before the snows hit." As it turned out, they barely did, and once back on the King's Road, they quickly found a shaded place to make camp for the night, not really wanting to have to do so during a snowstorm. The storm itself lasted for 2 days, keeping them where they'd made camp, and they were thankful that they had done so close to a stream. Jon. Daily travel along the road was dull and boring, he thought. They had settled into a routine, up early to break their fast, travel until luncheon, and stop off for an uncooked meal before settling for a place to make camp each night. Some days they were lucky and found a place for their campsite early. When they did, they'd stop their travel for the day. Others, though, they hadn't found a suitable place and traveled much further to do so. Jon hated those days when they'd eventually find somewhere it'd be near dark, and setting up tents and preparing meals always seemed rushed, and even to sleep, those nights didn't refresh them. He also found that those nights he dreamt less, he didn't get to visit Reimagined, and they added to his bad moods when he woke of a morning. It would take him a number of hours to feel better when he didn't see or speak to his sister. He also found he couldn't warg as easily, as if his mind was troubled more those days. After the nights he did dream of Reimagined, he found himself waking far happier, far more refreshed. His warging seemed to not only occur easier, but he found he could do more with it. A day ago, he and Josian had practiced with a bird. He had spent the night before walking around the caves below the Dragonmont with Rhaenys, exploring the island of their ancestors even more. When Josian suggested they warg into birds, Jon hadn't been interested, but what Josian said next really intrigued him. Why don't we try and reach out, Jon, picture a place and see if we can find a bird near there? How will we see them if they're so far away? He asked. We reach out, Jon. The book said it can be done. We don't need to see it with anything other than our third eye. What? Our mind, Jon said as Loras laughed. Despite his skepticism, he did as Josian suggested. It took him longer than usual, but he found a gull, and after a while he was inside. Its mind. He had pictured the volcano in his head, and next thing he knew, he could see them in the air. Lots of them. Picking one out, he reached out, and it welcomed him. The connection felt different, though, looser, almost like a fishing line resting in the water. He felt if he pulled on it, he'd lose it, so he let it stay the same. Flying over and seeing the castle itself, he found what he saw was both just like it had been in his dreams with Rhaenys and not the same. It seemed darker, more foreboding, and as he looked at the banners and flags, he could see why. Stag didn't belong here. He looked down on men walking his family's towers, his family's parapets, and without even thinking it, he felt the gull release its bowels and watched on as the contents landed directly on a stag banner. Josian asked as he opened his eyes. It worked, Jon said, smiling. Jon, your nose, Loras said, handing him a piece of cloth to wipe the blood. Are you all right? Aye, I feel fine. It worked. Loras, Josian. It worked. It did. Where did you go? Josian asked. Dragonstone. For the rest of the day, he had a terrible headache, and he had wondered if it was his age, his strength, or did he need more practice to allow him to do so without being hurt? Or was this the price for going beyond what he should? He waited another couple of days to warg again, and once again tried the same thing, which led to another discovery. Are you sure, Jon? Loras asked. It'll be fine. Besides, if it does hurt again, I'll know, won't I? All right, just be careful, Loras said, and he smiled at his friend's concern. Reaching out, he found himself once again over Dragonstone, and as he looked above for gulls to warg into, he noticed something strange. One gull seemed different, almost brighter than the others. Jon reached for it and prepared to have the conversation to allow him enter. Only he found the door open. When he entered, he found the reason why this was a place he'd been before. This was the same gull. This time the bond was even tighter, still not as tight as one with an animal closer, but tighter all the same. So excited was he by the discovery that he found himself staying longer within the gull, and when he landed on some rock, it was only then he broke the connection. Coming back to the others, he opened his eyes and found Loras looking worriedly at him. Though this time, to his relief, there was no blood coming from his nose, he explained what he'd found to Josian, and they tried to make sense of it, but couldn't. Later that day, he found, though he had a headache, it was far lesser than the one previous. It was a little over a week and a half into their journey that they were joined by a company of Stark men. Jon recognized Jory, Olin, and Weil amongst them, and was happy to see them. Though surprised they had come to meet them, as they drew closer, though he saw the relief in the men's eyes and wondered if something had happened. Of course, that was when Ghost decided to make his appearance, and after the horses calmed down and the men realized the wolf was with him. The questions began. Is that a direwolf? Olin asked. Aye, it's Ghost. He's harmless. Aren't you fella? Jon said, and ignored the sniggers behind him. Yeah, harmless, Loras snorted. Lord Jaime, Lord Stark sent us to escort you to Winterfell. We expected you earlier, Jory said. We stopped within Last Hearth for a day and got caught up in a storm, so stopped traveling. No other problems, my lord? Jory asked. No, it was uneventful. Jaime answered. It's no good to see ye, lad. Jari said, then smiling at him. You too, Jory. You're faring well. I am. You look well too, lad, Jory said, and Jon nodded in agreement. Once they joined them, they continued traveling for the rest of the day. They were no more than 3 days out, and when they camped that night, Jory brought him up to date on what he'd missed while he'd been away. He told him of his new brother and of Arya and Sansa. When pressed on Robb, he wouldn't say much, though Jon noticed the look which appeared on his and Alan's face. You'll be looking forward to seeing your father again, no doubt, Jory said. And Jon nodded while Lors and Jaime looked uncomfortable, and Mira and Jorizin smiled at him reassuringly. Aye, I'm looking forward to seeing them all. Jari. Jon said, smiling, and received a warm smile from the man in return. Going to bed that night, Jon felt a little worried about how things would go once he did get back to Winterfell. How would his uncle react? How his wife would... He looked forward to seeing his siblings again, though. As he took the egg out of the chest and lay back in the bed, he hoped he'd get along with them as much as he did with Rhaenys. He thought of his sister as he fell asleep, hoping to meet her in his dreams again. He found her today, walking by some water pools in a bright garden. She beckoned him to join her as she sat down and placed her feet in the water. His sister had grown into a poised and beautiful young lady. Her hair was long and dark, and it rested on her bare shoulders, her dark skin contrasting with it perfectly. Her purple eyes were dark and mysterious, he thought, but to him they were always welcoming, friendly, and they sparkled when she saw him. As he sat beside her, he could see the contented smile on her face. She looked at peace. She looked happy, and he was grateful for it. When he had found her again, she told him he had left her alone, left her with no one to speak to. Mother and father and Egg were gone. She said, it was only her and then he had left her too. He had promised never to leave her alone again, and so far had been able to live up to that promise. Where are we, Rhea? The water gardens. Mother and father brought me here once. Balerian and I played over there in the water, though he didn't like being splashed. Rhaegar, he said, laughing. We could have come here often then, Jay asked. We could you, me, Egg, Dany, this, all of us playing with my uncle's children. Do you think they'd have liked me, your uncles? Jay asked. I like you, so they would had to, or else I wouldn't like them. Jay, Rain said, and Jay nodded. They stayed there for a while, laughing and joking. At one point, Jay had jumped into the water and pulled Rhaenys in after him. Her retribution had been swift and merciless, as she had splashed him repeatedly until he could barely breathe, before finally giving him respite. Now see what happens, she said, looking sternly at him before breaking into laughter. He loved these parts of the dreams, but as he saw the dark clouds gather, he feared the next part. As always, though, she was there right beside him, her hand in his, and they waited for the sky to darken completely and the visions to begin. He saw a large dog protect a baby dragon, while all around it, people tried to poke it with pointed sticks. He saw a beast with the body of a lion and a scorpion's tail being caught in a net while blinded by a shining star. He saw a snake lie crumbled and broken under a large rock, and a wolf break free from the chains that held it down. He saw his sister look at him and smile, while above them a dragon flew free in the sky. He felt the hand that held him fade away, and as he looked to see Rhaenys, he found himself alone, but for a white wolf, until the dragon landed and looked at him with dark purple eyes. He woke up in a cold sweat and tried to make sense of what he'd seen. He took out the small book he used for notes and quickly wrote down what he'd dreamt, marking the where and when of it all. The book had other dreams, one from the wall and another from last hearth. It had a couple he'd had on the road, some he'd been able to figure out, some not yet. But he knew from his talks with Josiah that these were important. Rosiers had told him that too, though he knew not why they were so. He dressed quickly and broke his fast with the others. Jory sent Alan and Weil on to Winterfell to announce they'd arrive on the morrow, and they quickly set off for the day. He looked forward to being in a room again, to be somewhere safe and warm. He wished to read his father's letters and had not done so, but briefly when his uncle had given them to him. The thoughts of the letters being damaged or lost had led him to leave them tied and locked up tight at the bottom of his chest. They were far too precious to him, and so he wouldn't risk them during travel. I can't wait to spar again, Lord Zira said, taking him out of his thoughts. Me too, Jon said as they readied themselves for the final part of their journey. The rest of the day and the night itself passed quickly. They rode, and Ghost looked out longingly at the Wolfswood, and Jon told him he'd be allowed there soon, which seemed to keep him happy enough for now. It was on the following day that he saw it for the first time in years. They crested a hill, and there in the distance it stood. Winterfell, Jon said softly. Winterfell 2093 AC. Ned. He was sitting in his solar when Alan knocked at the door with the news that Jon's party had been spotted. Nodding to his guard, he called for Vayan to ready the household to welcome them. He found himself both excited and terribly nervous to meet Jon again after the 4 years the boy had been away from home. What would his boy be like had he changed? Did he know the truth? These and other thoughts were racing through his head as he walked down towards the courtyard. When word had come to him of the things Jon did, he had felt so proud of his boy. To see him reach his potential was more than he ever dared to dream, but it also brought with it the same worries it always had. Fame brought notice, notice brought questions, and should Robert ever begin to ask the right questions, then Jon's life, and by extension Ned's and his family's, was in danger. But it seemed that Jon didn't really attract that attention, and Ned had breathed a sigh of relief, while then having to deal with the other problems they brought. Kat consistently and continually complained about the boy as she called him, never his name, and never where he could hear it. Had she called Jon a bastard? But he had no doubt she had done so. As news arrived at Winterfell about Jon's achievements, and despite his own reassurances, Kat had been convinced this was a master plan to take Winterfell from Robb. Something that Ned knew in his heart would be the last thing Jon would ever do. Besides, if Jon ever set his sights on taking what was rightfully his, Winterfell wouldn't be the prize he sought. He smiled as he saw his children line up in the yard to await the arrival. Sansa looked resplendent as always, and little Arya looked eager for a new experience, while Bran looked nervous and Robb and Theon were laughing and japing as usual. His wife, though, looked as if she was fit to burst. Her features were schooled, but he knew that at some point he'd hear it yet again. He sighed as he looked at her. In all their years of marriage, the only disagreements they had that were in any way serious were the ones when Jon was brought up. He had only ever lost his temper with her when they spoke of his boy. "Father, are they really here?" Sansa asked excitedly. "Aye, my love, they are," Ned said as he heard the hoofbeats on the pathway to the keep. He looked to the gate as he took his place beside his wife. He saw the blonde hair of Jaime Lannister and a brown-haired boy beside him, and then he saw a sight he'd never expected to see in Winterfell. The white wolf was enormous, and he could hear the gasps all around when people saw it. A dire wolf. It was true. His son had a dire wolf. Ned couldn't stop the smile that appeared on his face then. It was mere moments later that he saw him. Jon had grown both taller and it seemed he'd filled out more. His hair was longer than he'd expected, and when he saw him look towards his family and saw the smile that appeared on his face, it was like an arrow to his heart. It was his sister's smile. As he watched them dismount and walk towards them, he felt his heart race, his mouth suddenly dry. "Lord Jaime, welcome to Winterfell," Ned said with a nod. "I thank you, Lord Stark, but we both know it's not I you wish to see," Jaime said with a smirk. "Lord Stark?" Jon said with a nod, and Ned frowned at the formality. "Jon, welcome home, son," Ned said, and waited for a friendlier response, which didn't come as Jon. Instead, introduced the other boy. "May I present Lord Lorziel Tyrell, my lord," Jon said, smiling as the other boy moved forward. "A pleasure to meet you, my lord," the young boy said, before Jon introduced Hallin's 2 children, Mira and Jojen. It surprised Ned that they'd traveled with him, and he didn't need to look to see the grimace on his wife's face. "Lady Stark," Jon said politely. "Jon," Kat said, and he could hear the forced civility in her tone. "Robb," Jon said softly. "Snow?" Robb replied stiffly, and Ned turned to glare at his son. "Little sister, look at you. You've grown so much." It's good to see you, Jon," Sansa said, her manners impeccable. "Now that's no way to greet your brother, is it?" Jon Japhet and Ned felt his heart expand at the large hug and excited squeal that came from his daughter at something Jon whispered in her ear. "Arya, is it really you?" Jon said, a note of shock in his voice, which confused Ned. "Who else would I be?" the little girl said to laughs. "Is that your wolf?" You want to meet him?" Jon asked. "Can I?" she asked, her voice full of wonder. "Of course," Jon said, and Ned watched as the wolf, which since Jon dismounted had been sitting quietly by his horse, suddenly got up and walked towards them, its size becoming even more apparent the closer it got. "Ned, the children," Kat said loudly. "I assure you, Lady Stark, that Ghost won't harm them," Jon said, and Ned shook his head at his wife to leave it be, which she did, albeit reluctantly. While Jaime and Loras made their introductions to everyone and Sansa stumbled through her words, meeting the Warden of the West and the Tyrell boy, Ned noticed Theon and Robb giggle when the Reeds passed them by. He would need to speak to them both later. He would not tolerate them disrespecting Howland's children. He looked on as Arya and then Bran ran their hands down the wolf's fur and watched as Jon helped a clearly nervous Sansa do the same. "He's so soft," Sansa said. "Aye, little sister, he is." "Lord Yansson, I've made some rooms available for your men in our barracks. Jory can show them the way. Daeon will show you and Lord Yes as well as Howland's children to their rooms," Ned said while still paying more attention to Jon. "I thank you, Lord Stark, and Jon," he asked. "We'll stay in his old room," Ned said and would have said something about the look Jaime gave him. But something else grabbed his attention. "Tholin will take the wolf to the kennels," Cat said. "Ghost sleeps with me, my lady," Jon said determinedly, and Ned sighed. He had hoped the pleasantries would last longer than this. "I'll not have that filthy beast in my halls near my children," Cat said haughtily. "Ghost is not a filthy beast, my lady," Jon said, staring angrily at his wife. "Nade, surely you can't allow this," Cat said, and he sighed. There would be more battles ahead, and this wasn't a hill worth dying on. "Cat's right, Jon. It's too dangerous to have the wolf in the keep. We'll find a good spot for him in the kennels." Lord Stark, Ghost stayed with Jon in White Harbor and in Last Hearth without incident. Neither lord felt the need to protect their children from him. Lord Tyrell said, stepping beside Jon. "Father, look, he's friendly," Sansa said, and to prove it, she knelt down and giggled when the wolf licked her face. All her earlier nervousness now gone. "It's just a damn beast who cares where it sleeps." Theon suddenly piped in, though the look he gave him made the boy step back. "I think it's for the best, Jon," Ned said, looking to his son and hoping he'd see reason. "Very well, Lord Stark," Jon said, and Ned breathed a sigh of relief, though it was a short-lived one. He watched on in shock as, rather than allow the wolf to be led away, Jon turned and mounted his horse, Loras following him along with the wolf, not understanding what had just happened. It took him a moment to realize that they meant to leave. It was only when Lord Jaime nodded to him and made his way to his own horse that the reality of the situation dawned on him. He looked to see Sansa looking just about ready to cry, while Cat stood there with a satisfied look on her face. He couldn't allow this. "Jon, wait," he said, as he moved towards them. "It's fine, Lord Stark. I'm sure we can find somewhere in Wintertown, and we can still visit," Jon said. "Do I have your word that the wolf will be under control, son?" Ned asked. "You do, my lord," Jon said, and Ned nodded. When Jon dismounted this time, Ned made sure to have him brought to his room straight away. He didn't want to give him time to change his mind again. He saw the happy smile that suddenly appeared on Sansa's face and how Arya and Bran followed with their sister and Jon towards his room. Cat glowered at him, and Ned shook his head. He'd deal with that later. As the others were shown to their rooms, he motioned for Robb and Theon to join him. "I saw you with the Reeds. You'll both behave better than that, do you understand?" "Aye, my lord," Theon said. "Yes, father. Now why don't you get ready to show your brother around the place? It's been a long time since you saw him," Ned said, and Robb nodded before he and Theon walked away. Ned entered the keep and walked to his solar, knowing his wife would either be waiting for him there or be along soon. Their inevitable argument soon to breach all the same subjects: how Jon was trying to steal Winterfell, how he'd shamed her brother. That one alone would take up most of the day, he knew. What had happened in King's Landing he did not know, but he found it hard to believe the story Cat told. That wasn't his boy. He's not your boy. The voice said in the back of his mind, but he was, and Ned found it hard to reconcile the actions in King's Landing with Jon, different though he clearly was now. Jon? While Loras, Jaime, and the Reeds were housed in the guest wing, Jon had unsurprisingly to him been given his old room. As he entered it with his sisters and brother, he was, however, surprised by how small and bare it was. Had it always been this way when it was his, he wondered as his things were brought in. He couldn't remember, but compared to the rooms he'd been housed in since, this was certainly the most lackluster. Still, though, there was something comforting and familiar about the room, and as he sat on the bed, he smiled. "So I expect you want your presents, little sister," Jon said, looking to Sansa. "What? No, I mean yes, but that's not why I'm here, Jon," Sansa said, and Jon reached over to hug her yet again. "I know that. I'm so happy to see you again, Sansa. I missed you," Jon said, and looked at her as the smile appeared on her face. "You too, you little terror," Jon said as he grabbed Arya and began to tickle her much to her delight. "Did you miss me, Jon?" Bran said, his voice small. "Of course I did," Jon said, and began tickling his brother too. "He's so well behaved," Sansa said, looking over at Ghost, who was laying quietly down by the fire. "Sometimes he's really not, now presents," Jon said, and got up to walk to his chest. The first set he took out were for Arya, and these he'd thought long and hard about. Sansa, he knew what she liked, and Bran was a boy, and he could guess, but when Sansa spoke of their baby sister, she described a girl like no other. Ribbons and dresses, fabrics and pretty things wouldn't cut it for Arya. So Jon had decided on a couple of other things instead. The first was a book of drawings he had done: Casterly Rock, Lannisport, Castamere, King's Landing, Ghost, the Pinnacle ships, Wind Wheels, and more. All the places and things he'd seen since he left Winterfell. When he handed it to her, she looked at it in amazement. "Thank you," Arya said, smiling before he handed her the second present. "I had this made for you in Lannisport," he said as he handed her the wolf pendant. It was a shining silver wolf with golden topaz stones for eyes. "Really for me?" Arya said, and jumped up to wrap her arms around him. "Aye, for you." When Arya let him go, he reached over to his chest to take out Bran's presents. He too got a wolf pendant. This one, though, had quartz for the eyes. His other present was an elaborate set of soldiers, horses, catapults, and dragons. They had belonged to a Saiva set, but Jon had had more of the figures made up, so there were now over 40 of them. "Do you like them, brother?" Jon asked. "These are mine, just mine?" Bran asked. "Aye, they are." "Thanks," Bran said, and quickly grabbed the present, lest it be taken away from him, making Jon laugh. He looked to Sansa, who was eagerly awaiting her own. He smirked as he may have gone slightly overboard with presents for her. She too got a wolf pendant, though the gems in the eyes this time were the most elaborate of them all. These gems were called cat's eyes and were remarkable, and while the others gave the impression of eyes, these actually gave the impression they were looking right at you. Her next present was a golden locket on a chain. The design engraved on it was of a wolf standing tall, whale howling at a small moonstone. The last couple were the fabrics he'd purchased in Gulltown. Miri Chalace, which he could see her smile brightly at as she ran her fingers through it, and a selection of other fabrics, which made her eyes go even wider when she saw them all. "Jon, this is too much." "Not for my little sister, it isn't," Jon said, and she smiled happily at him. He helped her carry her presents down to her room, Arya and Bran following behind. He carried Rob's in his hand, hoping to see his brother in the family wing. As they walked, they met Loras, who had clearly settled in and was already bored, given the look on his face. "Lady Sansa," Loras said with a bow when he saw them. "Lord Loras," his sister said shyly as she curtsied, while behind her Arya just giggled and Bran paid no mind. "Where are Josian and Mira?" Jon asked. "Mira's not feeling too well, so Josian decided to stay with her." "I think she's just tired, though," Loras said, and Jon nodded. When they reached the children's rooms, Arya left the book in her room and quickly rejoined them. Bran went to a different room that already had some toys in it, eager, no doubt, to play with his new ones. Sansa bid them enter her room to place the things down on her table, and Jon was immediately struck by the difference between her room and his, where Jon's was small and bare. Sansa's was not. The furniture, the bed, the bedding, all of it was of a much better quality than his own. The room was brighter, warmer too, not that Jon begrudged his little sister anything, but it did show him the contrast in how they were both treated. After leaving her room, they finally came across Robb and Theon, the Ironborn, looking at both him and Loras with a smug grin on his face. Jon handed over the presents he'd bought for his brother. As with the others, he too got a wolf pendant. The eyes on this one made from garnet. He'd also gotten his brother an ironwood bow, something which had taken a lot of work and coin to get the wood delivered to him. "Thanks, no," Robb said half-heartedly. "Robb," Sansa said, annoyed. "What?" "That's the best you can do after Jon brought you a present. You can barely thank him." "I did thank him, didn't I, Snow?" Robb said, smirking. "His name is Jon," Loras said angrily. But Jon looked at him and shook his head before he said, or did anything else. "He's a bastard. They're called Snow," Theon said, wearing the same smug grin he had before. "He's our brother," Sansa said loudly. "Whatever," Robb said as he and Theon walked away, leaving the bow and pendant behind. "I'm so sorry, Jon. I don't know what goes through his head sometimes." As for Theon, gods. Sansa said while Arya rushed over and picked up the bow, looking at it with interest. Can I have it? Arya said, making both him and Loras laugh. I think we better leave it for your brother, little wolf. Jon said, and Arya looked at him with annoyance on her face. But, she said as he took it off her, maybe we can have a smaller one made for you, eh? Jon said, mussing her hair, and she smiled beamingly at him. Jon carried the bow and pendant back to his own room and left them there before hurrying back to catch up with Sansa and Loras, who'd headed to the outside, his sister keen to show his friend more of their home. Rhaegar, though, hadn't left his side, and as she walked beside him, she kept rubbing her hand through Ghost's fur, her little hand only managing to reach the wolf's side as he towered over her. When they did catch up with Sansa and Loras, they were walking towards the glass gardens, so they joined them while Ghost instead walked off in the other direction, much to Arya's chagrin. Where's Ghost going? She asked. He does that from time to time, little wolf. Jon, I was just about to show Lord Loras the flowers. He doesn't believe we grow them here, Sansa said, smirking. Then I think he's in for a big surprise, little sister, Jon said, reaching his hand down to take Arax's in his as they entered the glass gardens. It's so warm, Jon. Why didn't you tell me there were warm places like this in the north? Rhaegar said, his eyes closed as he enjoyed this newly found heat. Maybe we should move his bed out here. What do you think, Sansa? Jon said, smirking at Arya, who giggled. What? No, we couldn't. He's a Lord Jon, we couldn't. Wait! You were making a jest, Sansa said, giggling as she saw his face. Only half a one, trust me. I wouldn't be surprised if we find him here a lot. Jon said as he watched Loras sit down on the bench and lean back. You have the truth of it, Loras said, making both his sisters laugh now. Out of the corner of his eye, though, Jon saw them and walked towards them almost in a daze. The winter roses shined in the light, the blue looking more clear and sharp than he had ever remembered, the color being before. His hand reached out almost on its own, his fingers touching the petals. Feeling the tears in his eyes, he quickly wiped them away, not wishing to have to explain crying while in a glass garden. When Loras came over, he smiled at him, and Jon took his knife out to cut 3 of the flowers, putting one in his pocket before walking to his sisters with the other 2. For my 2 beautiful sisters, Jon said, handing each of them a winter rose. I thank you, sir, Sansa said, with a curtsy and a smile. It was my pleasure, my lady, Jon said with a bow, and getting a laugh from Sansa in return. Rhaegar looked at him oddly as she held the flower in her hand, so Jon knelt down and took it, and from her hand, and placed it in her hair. Now you look just like a fierce and beautiful little wolf, Jon said, and Arya smiled before laughing when he tickled her. Stop it, Geralt, she said, laughing louder. My lady, shall we leave these ruffians? Loras said, smirking while he offered his arm to Sansa. Why, thank you, brave knight. I fear for what they may do to us. Have no fear, my lady. I shall protect you from the wolves. Loras said, laughing, as he and Sansa walked from the glass garden. Apparently we're ruffians and wolves. What to do? Jon said before kneeling down, so Arya could climb on his back. They waited until Sansa and Loras left before Jon ran outside. Arya holding onto his back and shouting, Faster, Wolfie, faster. Arya shouted as Jon raced past Loras and Sansa, both of whom were doubled over in laughter. Catelyn. She was furious that boy had only just arrived and already Ned was taking his place. He had humiliated her in the courtyard when all she had been doing was trying to protect her children from the bastard's beast. She had waited as long as she could, and despite trying to calm herself with sewing it hadn't worked, she would need her husband to see clearly what she already knew, that the bastard was up to something. When the news had come of what had happened in King's Landing, she had stormed to her husband's solar to tell him how his bastard had tricked and shamed her brother, how he had said such horrible lies about her family. She had actually felt in some ways relieved, as it proved everything she had ever thought about the bastard and his nature, proved just exactly why she needed to be wary of him. But instead of listening to her, Ned had made excuses for the boy, had told her there must be some mistake. She had it in her own brother's words, had she not. Yet it still hadn't been enough for her husband to do anything about it, even when news came that the bastard was coming to Winterfell. Ned had refused to listen to her and not allow him to come. That he was traveling with Jaime Lannister was bad enough, but that he had somehow made friends with the Tyrell boy made it even worse. Her children should be friends with the first and second richest families in the realm, not Ned's bastard. She had been happy when the raven came from the Tyrells telling her that their son would be coming to visit, though disappointed it hadn't been the heir, as he would be a worthy match for her. Sansa, who was certainly not going to be wasted on a third-born son. But he would do as a way to introduce the Tyrells to them. Robb could befriend the boy, and maybe they could organize a visit. If not the heir, then perhaps the daughter. Yes, that could work out well, she had thought. Lady Margaery would be a good match for the future Warden of the North. But then she had read that he was in the bastard's company. Why is he with the bastard? She asked Septa Mordane. They are tricksters, my lady. Perhaps he's enraptured the boy, the Septa said. But he's trueborn. Surely he knows all about their ways. He's just a boy, my lady. Perhaps he's not paid attention to his lessons. I shall have to welcome him all the same. Maybe once he sees Robb and spends time away from the bastard, he'll realize the truth. That sounds like a wonderful idea, my lady. He could spend time with Lady Sansa, too. My daughter will marry an heir, Septa nothing less. Of course, my lady. I just meant that perhaps if he was allowed to spend time with Lady Sansa, it would have him bring up his sister while speaking to her. Yes, that and befriending Robb, Lady Margaery could visit. She and Robb, oh yes indeed, that's a most excellent idea. But already she could see that there was no way she'd allow that boy near her family. He was already far too much under the bastard's spell. Given what had just happened in the courtyard, both he and Lord Jaime were, but there was nothing she could do about them. They were trueborns, and lords. No, it was only the bastard she had power over, though he no longer seemed to think so. So now as she stormed to her husband's solar, she'd make it clear to him that she did. She'd not have him walking around after humiliating her so. Is my husband inside? She said to Alan as she reached the door. Aye, my lady, Alan said as he knocked and opened it for her. She walked inside and saw her husband sitting at his desk, his hand reading a raven scroll. She watched as he winced, then smiled, and then winced again, before putting the scroll down and looking to her. My lady, please take a seat, Ned said, and she did so, though she had intended to stand. I won't have it, Ned. I won't have him here. You saw what he did, she said, angrily. And what would you have me do, Cat? Send him away. You think if I do so that Jaime Lannister won't leave too? Him and the Tyrell boy both, maybe, Howland's children also. They made it very clear in the yard just what would happen if the wolf wasn't allowed to stay with Jon. How do you think they'd react to me sending Jon away? It doesn't matter anymore, he humiliated me in public, and you're just going to allow it to stand. Do I mean so little to you, my lord? She said, her voice pleading. Of course not. You're my wife, I'd not have you shamed more than I've already done myself. But you were wrong, Cat. The wolf is no problem, and certainly no danger to our children. This is a raven from Lord Umber, this from Lord Manderley. Ned said, picking up both pieces of paper. Jon and his accompaniment stayed in both their houses, and these ravens are full of praise for both him and his wolf. Ned said, smiling, before he schooled his features. Why was he staying with the Umbers? I told you this would happen. He's making friends with your bannermen, and you're doing nothing about it. Cat said, her voice agitated. What would you have me do, Cat? Tell them to turn down the deals he's brought to them, to turn down the coin he's brought to the north. Bear Island alone is soon to be as rich as the Manderleys from their deal. If what Waterman says is true, the great Jon writes of a deal to sell ice, which I do not understand. But if it's so, then the North can only benefit. My bannermen would not take kindly to me forbidding these deals. Ned said, looking at her. So we're to do nothing about him trying to usurp your son, nothing about him trying to steal your bannermen away. And what of my humiliation, my lord? Will you do nothing about that too? She said, tears falling from her eyes. Cat, Jon would never try to usurp Robb. We have nothing to fear from him. He loves his family too much. As for this morning, I shall speak to him, tell him how he's to act while here. Now, my lady, if there's nothing else... You're a fool, Ned. You'll see I'm right. And when you do, I hope it's before the bastard throws us all from our home. Cat said as she left the solar. She should have realized her husband would do nothing. He was not a man of action. He was nothing like Brandon. He wouldn't have let a bastard humiliate her or allow him be raised with their children. Had Brandon lived then, Jon Snow would have been Ned's problem alone and wouldn't have been in a position to threaten her children at all. Had he done so then, she had no doubt Brandon would have done whatever was necessary to protect her son's birthright. As she walked down the corridor, she heard loud laughing from outside. In the yard, racing to the nearest window, she looked down to see the bastard carrying her youngest daughter on his back. Loud laughs coming from Arya. She looked on as Sansa was holding the Tyrus boy's arm, and both were laughing as they watched the bastard pretend to be an animal of some sort, though was it really a pretense? Looking on, she saw her son and the Greyjoy boy looking on with disgust, and she smiled. At least her boy knew the truth of things as she saw the bastard, let her daughter down, and then run as she chased him. An idea came to her head. She smiled when she looked back at Robb. Of course that was it. He put the bastard in his place, show him up for the lesser thing he really was. Yes, she would speak to Robb later. "Mama, look, Jon gave me," Bran said, holding up a beautifully carved dragon. "It's lovely, sweetling," she said as she turned to look at her baby boy and smiled. "But your books are better, are they not?" "No, Mama, dragon," Bran said as he ran down the corridor, making noises she assumed were supposed to be dragon sounds. She grimaced. Her daughters, her baby boy, the bastard was ingratiating himself with them all, while all the while he plotted to steal their birthright. Was there anything in this world more devious than the baseborn? "Great Jaime." He walked past Jon's room and shook his head. He understood why Ned Stark would place him in his old room. The man no doubt thinking his nephew would appreciate the familiar surroundings. But to Jaime it showed that the man knew nothing. He had to know that Jaime wouldn't have put him in such a room in Casterly Rock, so after 4 years for Ned to do so would only prove to Jon how little he ever had when he was here. Worse than that, it showed no insight into how others would perceive it. Loras would be affronted for Jon, but Daisy and her sisters too would not be best pleased. Of course, just thinking of Daisy made him miss her even more, and so he needed to do something to keep his mind off his betrothed. He debated whether to spar, but in the end decided to go and make sure his men were settled. He had sent Joes and Alleries with some of the men to Wintertown. Only some of them would stay here in the keep itself, and even though Jon's guards would be among them, he knew they'd settle the men far better than his own would. He also would need to discuss with Ned Stark the mere fact that Jon had guards, something that would no doubt not go down well with the Lord. Deciding to head into the small town himself to check up on them, just for something to do, he headed out the door to go to the stables. Before he got the chance to leave, though, the Maester approached him. "My lord, a word if I may?" "Of course, Maester." "Luwin, my lord," the Maester said, smiling. "Luwin, of course, how may I be of help?" "There are some ravens for you, my lord." "From Casterly Rock?" "Oh, good. Do you have them with you?" "I'm afraid not, my lord. I hadn't expected to see you yet, so had intended to bring them later. If you'll follow me, I'll get them for you." "Very well." Jaime followed the man down the corridor and up the stairs to the rookery and the Maester's quarters. There were more stairs before he got there, leading up to the library itself, according to the Maester. When he entered the room, he was surprised by the number of books that were scattered around the place. Creedlin always kept his rooms neat and tidy, yet Luwin seemed more in order somehow. "My lord," the Maester said, handing him a couple of scrolls, which he opened, one from Tyrion and the other from his aunt. "Brother, we've arrived back at the Rock all safe and sound, though not without a few scratches from that damnable cat. Slap Jon for me next time you see him. I await your return eagerly and hope you are well. Tyrion." "Nephew, I am glad to be home, and shall not wish to travel such a way again for a long time. I shall ensure all is well in your absence, but do not take to long, nephew. Your place is her, with your family, and they miss you as do I." "You know." Jaime smiled, reading the two messages. He had sent one raven from White Harbor, as had Jon so, and he'd also sent news of his upcoming wedding by raven from Castle Black, which would no doubt be replied to while he was here. He decided he'd send them another from here just to let them know he'd arrived safely, so he asked the Maester for some parchment and wrote one out. "Can you send this for me, Maester?" "Of course, my lord," the Maester said with a small smile. "I thank you," Jaime said, turning to leave. "My lord, may I ask you a question about Jon?" "Of course, Master. The things I've read, the ships, the wind wheels, even this latest thing with ice, they are true, my lord." "They are, Maester." Jon's a very bright boy. His ideas have been invaluable. Jaime said, a note of pride in his voice. "Do you think he'd discuss them with me, my lord? I have some ideas, you see, some ways I think things could be used, though I wish I had an idea of how these wind wheels worked." "I'm sure he would, Master. I'll speak to him for you. As for the wind wheels, I'm sure Jon has some drawings of them, or if not, he could no doubt draw them for you." "Jon draws, my lord," the Maester said, surprise in his voice. "Aye, Maester, he's quite talented too, as I'm sure you see for yourself." "I look forward to it, my lord. I thank you for your help." "Think nothing of it, Master." Leaving the room, Jaime decided to go do what he was about to when the Maester had interrupted him, so, heading outside, he walked through the yard. As he was looking for the stables, he heard the laughter coming from the main courtyard, so he went to investigate and couldn't help but laugh himself silly at the sight. Jon was chasing his young cousin around and making a large, snorting sound which had the girl giggling, while her sister and Loras looked on. Every so often, Jon would stop and make a move towards his older cousin. forcing her to take refuge behind Loras, who stood ready to vanquish whatever beast Jon was pretending to be. "He seems happy," the voice of Ned Stark said from behind him. "Aye, he is, my lord." "Ned." "Nud," Jaime said with a smirk. "I've not seen my two daughters have such fun in many a moon. Jon has a way with people, especially those younger than him. He and my cousin Joy are inseparable at times, and he and Loras take time to train and play with my other young cousins, too." "With live steel?" Ned said. "No, Jon only uses tourney swords when training the children, though he and Loras have been using live steel for a number of moons now." "He's too young," Ned said, standing even closer to him now. "Is he? I've seen him wield a blade for over 4 years. There isn't a boy in the realm as good as he is, not just for his age, but older too. I doubt there's anyone close to him that's not in the lists, and in a year or two even they won't be a match," Aemma said before laughing as Jon fell to the ground and both girls jumped on him, wiping mud into his face. "What happened in King's Landing?" Ned said when his own laughter stopped. "Jon put a fish in its place. Perhaps he should follow his example, my lord," Jaime said and walked away before Ned could respond. Loras. Jon's sisters, cousins, no sisters, that's how Jon viewed them, and seeing him with them, it was hard for him to think of them any other way. His sisters were as different as could be, Sansa reminded him of Marguerite. She was polite, refined, and ladylike, while Arya, though younger and obviously because of that, less proper, was anything but, and he doubted she ever would be. While Sansa observed courtesies, her sister almost spat on them. She was a wild little thing, and Loras couldn't help but like them both immediately. His brother, on the other hand, was everything they were not. Impolite, unrefined, and not very lord-like. But considering he spent his time hanging around with an Ironborn, then Loras shouldn't have been surprised. He had thought the Northerners hated the Ironborn. Certainly, when Lady Dacey, her sisters, or Ser Jorah and his aunt spoke of them, they made it clear just what they thought of them. These people had reaved through the north for years. He also knew they'd attacked some of his own cousin's ships, too. But the Ironborn walked around the yards of Winterfell like he was a visiting lord and not a hostage. Not even a ward would stroll around his foster home, with the level of arrogance the Ironborn swaggered with, while Jon had been playing with his younger sister, and when he and Sansa weren't being dragged into the game, Loras had spent his time watching the two of them sniggering while staying on the outskirts of the yard. "That was so much fun," Sansa said before shrieking as a mud-covered Jon moved towards her. "Come here, little sister. Give your brother a hug," Jon said, and Loras laughed as the girl hid behind him again. "Oh, you really shouldn't do that, Loras," Jon said as he wiped some of the mud and made a move as if he was going to cover Loras with it. "Don't, Jon. Please," Sansa said, laughing. "Very well, little sister, but this isn't over," Jon said, and he and Arya walked to his room. The little girl not moving away when Jon pretended to wipe the mud in her face, though he didn't do so. "Lady Sansa, shall we?" Loras said, and Sansa giggled as she took his arm. "Tyrell," he heard a voice call from behind him and turned to see Robb and Theon approach. "His name is Loras," Sansa said determinedly, still holding his arm. "I'm sorry, my lady." "Loras," Euron said mockingly. "What Greyjoy," Lorch said, and Sansa laughed openly. "We were wondering if you'd like to join us for a spar," Robb said with a charming smile. "I'm afraid I'll have to refuse, Lord Robb. I have a previous engagement, you see. A lady who needs escorting," Loras said, and he and Sansa moved to walk away. "Ladies and bastards, you keep odd company, Tyrell," Robb said, laughing while he suddenly felt Sansa grip him tighter. "Far better company than squids, though," Loras said as he walked away to load, muttering. "Thank you," Sansa said softly. "For what, my lady?" Loras asked. "For not fighting with them. As I said, I had a previous engagement," Loras said, and Sansa smiled. They headed for Jon's room, and Loras was surprised at how far away it was from everyone else's. Though when he got there, he was more surprised to see just how different it was to his own. Loras's room, though not as luxurious as his quarters in Highgarden or the Rock, was compared to this one vastly superior. That they would put his friend here annoyed him. That they would put the rightful king here made him furious. "This was my old room. It's good to be back in it," Jon said, smiling when Loras looked at him. "Is it?" "Ah, it is," Jon said. Before he could speak further, Rhaegar came running in with a servant carrying paper and charcoal, along with some inks and quills. "What's that for?" Sansa asked curiously. "Jon's drawing me," Arya said, smiling. "Drawing you what?" Sansa asked, her voice full of confusion. "Drawing me," Arya said determinedly, and Jon thankfully clarified before Sansa got annoyed at her lack of understanding. He asked me if I drew people because of her book, so when I said I did, she wanted me to draw her. Can you draw me too? Sansa asked excitedly. Of course, though I'll need colored ink. For what? Sansa said. Your hair stupid? Lordia said, giggling. Loras could see Sansa half torn between getting annoyed at her sister for calling her stupid and wanting to get the ink. Let's go get the ink, Sansa. All right. By the time they came back after visiting the master, Jon had almost finished Arya's picture. It was incredible, though. Jon did say he'd make her a better one before he left. Not that Arya even heard him, as she was far too busy looking at the picture in awe. Sansa sat down, and Jon took a little more time with her picture. As he was finishing it, a servant arrived, telling them they'd be serving dinner soon. You're all done, Jon said, handing Sansa the picture. Jon, it's wonderful. Thank you, brother, Sansa said, grabbing him in a hug, which took a long time for either of them to let go. I shall need to do another so I can bring it with me, Jon said, and Sansa nodded. He and Jon then took the two girls back to their rooms so they could get ready for dinner. After leaving them, Jon walked with him to his room. Are you sure you're all right about the room? Jon, Loras said. I don't think he meant anything by it, Loras. I think he thought it was a nice gesture. Anyway, I'll see you for dinner, Jon said, and patted him on the shoulder before heading back to his room. Perhaps that's what he meant by it, but Loras couldn't shake the idea from his mind that had Jon stayed here, this is how he'd have grown up, apart from the family. Given how his brothers saw him, it seemed he had already decided he was not a part, while his sisters obviously didn't agree. But for Loras, it was the knowledge that Lord Stark had obviously not seen him as fully his family either, which he couldn't come to terms with. Jon! He dressed quickly for dinner. A small part of him considered wearing the red shirt and black clothing to wear the colors of his family. But in the end, he went with his usual dark clothing. Black really was his color. As he tied the favor to his belt, he smirked at his own stupidity. When Arya had asked him to draw her earlier, he had done so easily. Even Sansa he had no trouble with. Yet they weren't the only girls in his life, and why had he not thought to draw the others before now, he couldn't tell. Though perhaps it was partly the lack of colored inks that had done it for him. His mother's picture, which he'd usually kept with his father's letters, was dark and used one ink. Arya's too, but Sansa's had seemed wrong without the red. He knew now that he'd need purple for his sister's eyes, and the right shade of brown for Margaery's along with her hair. Black ink would only distort their images for him. Today had been incredible, though, and he wished his whole time here could be this much fun. But he knew that in some way he'd been hiding from his uncle partly, and that would change soon. But even more so, from the place he knew he'd have to go to, he shook his head and decided to enjoy the meal as much as he could. The rest would take care of itself. Are you still not ready? Lorsier said as he opened his door. No, I'm good. Is that what you're wearing? Jon said, sniggering. What's wrong with it? This is my best outfit, Lord said worriedly. Oh, the outfit's fine. It's the idiot wearing it. Jon jabbed and was too slow to duck the slap Loras caught him with. Oh, you do know I could have your hand for that, Jon said, laughing. Then how would I protect you, my king? A one-handed swordsman. What use is that? Lorsied said, laughing. Come on, my little sister. No doubt awaits your company. Jon, you know. Lorsier's stumbling over his words. I know, Loras. I thank you for being so nice to her, though. It's my pleasure, Jon. I like them both. Me too. They left the room, Jon locking the door after him. He had hidden the egg and his father's letters in his old hiding spot. Better to be safe than sorry, he thought. But still, he didn't want anyone going through his other things either. Before going to Great Hall, though, he and Loras headed to the guest wing to check up on Mira and Jojen. He hadn't seen them since he arrived and was a little concerned about Mira being sick. Can I come in? He said, knocking on the door that Loras pointed out. Jon, is that you? He heard Jojen say. Aye, he said as he opened the door. Mira was asleep in the bed, and Jojen had pulled a chair up and was reading one of the books he'd gotten from Aenon while watching over his sister. Jon walked over to him and saw he didn't seem too upset. Is she all right? She's just tired, Jon. She hadn't been sleeping well in the tents, so she needs some rest. Are you sure? Did Luwin look at her? I did, but she barely remembers. I just thought I'd stay here in case she woke up confused. Oh, all right, have you eaten? I did. You go eat, Jon. We'll see you on the morrow, Jojen said with a smile. You sure I can stay if you like? No go, be with your family, thanks though. All right, see you on the morrow. Good night, Jon. Good night, Jojen, Mira. He looked at the bed and nodded before leaving. Lawrence had waited outside while he spoke to Josen, so when Jon left the room, he looked to him and nodded. They were fine before they headed to the Great Hall. He was glad his uncle had not decided on a formal feast. There would be no dancing or music tonight. Instead, it was just family, Jaime, Loras, and the household. When they entered the Great Hall, Jon nodded to some of the people he hadn't seen in years. Sir Roderick and Thayampul, Neister, Lewin, Hollin, and Micken. He smirked at the looks the Septa and Septon gave him. When he had been younger, he assumed all the 7 hated bastards. He had found, though much to his surprise, that it mattered more where they were from. The Septon at Casterly Rock paid him no mind whatsoever, nor the one in Lannisport, the one Geryon had picked for Castamere. He actually liked, so no, it was just these two, it seemed, who hated him. His little sister practically waved her hand off for he and Loras to hurry up and take their seats beside them. Arya moving from the other side of the table to give Loras her seat and sit beside him as he sat down next to Sansa. Loras smiled, though, as he sat beside Bran and a small girl he didn't recognize, though later found out was Jane Poole, the steward's daughter. A few seats away, his brother sat in conversation with the Greyjoy boy, and Jon could see them both sniggering and japing while looking his way occasionally. His brother was a disappointment to him. He could see it now why Jory and the guards wouldn't speak of Robb when he'd asked. He was spoiled, arrogant and cocky, but he was his brother, and Jon would try and get along with him. He looked to see Jaime sitting talking to his uncle and his aunt, who wore a painted-on smile when speaking to his lord, but still gave him her usual looks when he caught her eye. "We're having steak and kidney pie with peas and gravy," Santa said, smiling at him. As she took a slice of the pie in front of her, "Gods, I missed Gage's pies," Jon said longingly. "Do you not get pies where you live, Jon?" Arya asked. "No, little wolf. No pies in the West, at least none as good as Gage's," Jon said, and Arya shook her head in horror at the thought. "You should stay here then," she said determinedly. "You could teach me how to use the bow you're making me." "What's that? You're making a bow for a little girl, Snow," Robb said, laughing. "Aye, it seems unlike some people, Acre actually appreciates gifts," Lorzair said loudly. "What's that you say?" his uncle asked. "Nothing, my lord," Lorzair said when he saw the glare Jon sent his way. "We were just talking about Snow making Arya a bow father," Robb said. "I think you're too young yet for such a thing, young lady," his uncle said, and Jon couldn't help but disagree. "I think you're never too young to learn something new, my lord. Should my sister wish it, I think she should learn to wield a bow or a sword," Jon said, looking at Hat's uncle while Arya nodded dear head in agreement. "We'll speak on this on the morrow, Jon," his uncle said, looking at him directly. "As you wish, my lord," Jon said. "Will you really teach me?" Arya said, leaning against him. "I will, little wolf. Now eat up. You'll need to be bigger and stronger to wield a sword, won't you?" Jon laughed as his sister started to swallow her food quicker. "Arya, slow down," Sansa said from beside him as little bits of crust began to fall on her lap from Arya's mouth. The meal was one of the best he'd had in years. Loras and Bran spoke a little on spars, while he also spoke to both his sisters, giving each of them as much of his time as he could. After the meal, Arya ran up to her father to show him the picture he'd drawn of her, which in turn led Sansa to head back to her room for her own picture. Even their mother smiled at the pictures, though still she gave him the same look. Jon decided to use the excuse of being overly tired from their travels to do what he wished, though, and ignored the snide remarks Robb and the Greyjoy boy made, though was pleased to see the annoyance in his uncle's face at them both. He bid good night to them all, but before he got the chance to leave, his uncle got up and accompanied him some of the way back towards his room. "It's good to see you well, son. I hope you know that." "I do, Lord Stark," Jon said, and his uncle grimaced. "We should speak on the morrow, Jon. We've much to discuss." "That we do, my lord. If you'll forgive me, I'm most tired." "Oh, of course. Good night, Jon." "Good night, my lord," Jon said as he unlocked and entered his room. He waited a few minutes until he was sure his uncle had headed back to the hall before leaving his room. Yana had allowed Jorahs and Alairs the night off as he hadn't spoken to his uncle yet about his guards, so Jon found himself alone in the corridor. He moved quickly and made it outside with no problems. Moving in the shadows, he almost made it all the way unnoticed, only for Ghost to appear in front of him. "Where have you been, boy?" he said softly as he rubbed the white fur. "Come, we've got somewhere to go." It didn't take him long to enter the crypts themselves. He picked up the unlit torch and, lighting it from the one nearest the door, walked by the statues. He reached his grandfather's first and closed his eyes before leaning in to touch it. He silently said a few words and moved on to his Uncle Brandon's, and did the same, before placing the torch on the wall and looking at his mother's. Reaching into his pocket, he took the winter rose out and placed it in her open hands. The statue before him was a dull likeness of the woman he'd seen. He reached inside his shirt and took out her picture and compared it to the statue and couldn't help but think the man who made it had done a poor job. He hadn't captured the light in her eyes, her spirit, her fierceness, looking at the picture and then the statue. He thought that if they'd wanted to embody his mother, they'd have done better doing a statue of Arya than what they did. "I'm sorry, Mother. I didn't know. Had I then I'd have come sooner. I swear it," Jon said softly as he felt the tears begin to flow. "I don't know if he'd have told me. I may have gone my whole life not knowing who you are, not knowing how close you were. As it is, I've gone 10 years without you, and every day I wake up and wish you were here with me. I'm doing it, Mother, doing what you asked me, what you wanted me to do. I will be the king the realm needs. I will fulfill your promise. I swear it on the old gods and the new. I swear it. I love you, Mother, now and forever." Jon ignored the tears that were rolling down his face. Ghost stirred beside him, and Jon rubbed his hand on the wolf's fur, before turning quickly at the sound of the footsteps that seemed far too close. "Your mother would have loved you with everything she had. It was the only she knew how to love. I, too, miss her every day. I miss when wolves roamed these halls, when a she-wolf refused to be cowed. For many years I've waited for the white wolf to return, for the pack to be whole once more. Only you can do it, young pup. For you're not only the prince that was promised, not only are you a dragon, you are a wolf. Jon Snow. The blood of the kings of winter flows through your veins, and the time has come for you to howl," Old Nan said, smiling as she reached down to rub Ghost.